to the latest podcast with me, Katie. This is about studying, exploring yoga in today's world. And yes, today is going to cover areas such as negativity bias, language, identity as always, self exploration. And identity relates to pretty much all of it. Um, I did start this podcast and then had to take a phone call, and then my computer went. So this is starting it afresh. This is the latest one. You may never have heard of the other one. But anyway, welcome back. So language is important, and we have language. Different languages can present different embodiments and experiences. And anyone who speaks more than one language or has started to explore other languages will have first-hand experience of that. Even just playing with just friends who speak different languages, and their gestures and the way they communicate gives a little bit of a hint of how this happens. Yes, some things can be universal, but definitely just to acknowledge that different languages can present different embodiments can be just a very useful thing. In with people in relationships, working with relationships, personal relationships, and just the joy of traveling and experiencing. So we can try and use our language instead of copying out, and saying some things are beyond language. So the more we articulate what is maybe more tricky to articulate or what is less articulated, the more our conversations can have a greater depth and wholesomeness, wholeness in many ways. So that's what we'll be delving into, and what we delve into these podcasts. So welcome back. Language is important. And yes, it's going to be a little bit of repetition in the beginning for those who joined before. But it's just, yeah, to recap, just if you've been on social media for many years, you'll probably have noticed that certain accounts will maybe or reading newspapers. If you go away for a while and you come back and you pick up a newspaper from your homeland, it could feel like you were never away. You're reading like similar things, just different characters, or maybe not. Maybe everything seems very different. Definitely in the past year, things would have seemed very different. Sort of waking up, it would be like to ground yourself that actually things have changed more than it wasn't just a dream. But yeah, so maybe when you started on social media, you started befriending people or you followed people, not necessarily because you shared interests, but maybe you met someone in a pub and you just said, oh yeah, let's follow each other. Or, a friend of a friend, or someone that someone is dating, a friend, a girlfriend of someone or boyfriend of someone that is a good friend of yours. And then maybe like you notice certain areas which come up, or similarities over the years of what they're sharing. And what I mentioned before is, I've noticed it in when people tend to have like injuries, or like every like 2 weeks they're sharing some new injury, or it could be a mental experience which is a difficult experience for them. People will respond, or people do respond to that, and they can say, oh, that's great, this person's very authentic, they're sharing, they're not trying to just say everything's great, which is, so there's been sort of a backlash against that. But on the other hand, we've got to be careful that we don't feed people, like support them in maybe a negativity bias and these kind of things. So if you Google negativity bias, what's going to come up is that it's easy for people to focus on what's not working, or what's tricky, or what's difficult in the day, as opposed to what is good. Or so and if any of you go on Facebook and play Word Blitz, the language that we speak is very different than this. I've completely lost my train of thought. Yeah, so here, if you focus on, so let's say if you start to celebrate what is going well and what's good in your life, then it's like a balance, to any tendency to have a negativity bias. So it's like celebrating the small wins. So if you're handstanding, and let's say you're working on longevity in the handstand, and you increase from 5 to 10 seconds, instead of thinking about the last handstand that maybe you fell out after 1 second, but you've actually in your session broke your record, then you can celebrate that win, and then you can see maybe just the overall experience is a different experience, more than focusing on maybe something which isn't necessarily going to make you feel the best. So it's like going surfing and just like, okay, each surf, let's see if something can improve, as opposed to just the wipeouts or being the certain things which may not feel that growth orientated at the time. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see where you have negativity biases. It could be in anything, in any other aspects. So also, if you look at, let's say, photos of yourself, or if you're walking down the street and suddenly you see a reflection of yourself somewhere, or you hear your voice or your accent, sometimes, I don't know if you ever had the experience where you don't recognize yourself. If you play word blitz on Facebook, you come up with all these new words that also you may not recognize yourself, the language that you use. But these are sort of aspects of ways in to realize that you've got like so many different facets or so many different areas to your identity, which is quite a useful tool to then not being fixed on certain aspects. So in, let's say, social media, it's easy if someone's got an audience, let's say, of, let's say they go to Alcoholics Anonymous every day. They're having challenges with alcohol or not to drink. They share this. Maybe they've got a whole audience of people who like are in the same boat. So they've attracted this. Maybe that's their clients. So it's going to be who's going to be their clients if that stops being like their daily battle, if things change, or other aspects to their life that they could get clients for, which are maybe aspects which flow quite easily for them. So it's the not being fixed on one identity is quite useful. Sometimes in yoga, or even with Buddhism, you see it, or people say, okay, if people do yoga or they do Buddhism, they'll fix all their issues. And maybe, for example, like religion is, you sometimes say religion's not the way, but yoga is the way, and then someone else will say like Islam is the way, but maybe Christianity is not the way, or calisthenics is the way, and what people are doing with the weights is not the way. And that's quite a useful sort of area to go a little bit deeper into, because if you Google sort of yoga and men abusing power in yoga, you're going to get quite a big list. So it's pretty useful to not be too fixed on just, again, it comes back to the identity on one particular kind of sense of identity being the way. I was last year in Gilead, and there's the slow food yoga festival there, and there was the Lombok people from Lombok, the Muslims, the elders there, created this video on their experience of Islam and how they see it, and I found it super inspiring. It was very, very much about universality, sort of love and joy, and it's very much what or the sort of the good parts of the experience of life that I feel, that I experience. So I was actually could see how it could be very enchanting, or it would be, I'd have like little qualms about saying, okay, fine, I'll go with this religion because it's I agree with what it's saying and the premises behind it and that kind of thing. So there's different aspects to religions. It's and there's different aspects to yoga. So it's not like yoga is going to just help in a sense. These are podcasts based on yoga in today's world. So it's useful to have those perspectives of where yoga is not necessarily being used, or people have experiences under the name of yoga which maybe aren't so sort of beneficial for everyone as well. And there's a lot been done in the name of Buddhism as well, which maybe couldn't be seen as, or could be seen as, not so beneficial. So today's podcast is, I'm covering a lot of different areas, and sometimes which is why there's been quite a while between this podcast and the previous ones, is because there wasn't one specific topic that I wanted to cover. But because sometimes when we have a lot of areas which are sort of coming up, it's quite useful to look at the way things relate, or the connections between the things. And so identity and exploring and going into a bit more depth in a lot of topics shows a language which is can then seen as universal, or universal precepts, or critical and analysis or critical thinking, which could really cover any topic at all. Another area is sort of useful praise or growth mindset when working with people. So, for example, if I'm working with someone in a handstand and it's maybe they've done 3 lessons with me and we're working on a straight line form handstand. Maybe they do a handstand where the neck is very far out. They're not trying to do a scorpion handstand. Their wrists, they feel like they're sinking, they're bending their elbows, but they're sinking into their wrists. At the end of the handstand experience, we talk about the handstand and they say they've got this wrist pain in that particular handstand and this is going on, this is going on. If I turn around and say, oh, that's a good handstand, it's not going to be so useful to that person. We can work on what can be done to explore, to expand for next time so that they don't get wrist issues or that they enjoy the experience a lot more. They can breathe. I mean, I can say, well done, you stay there for 5-10 seconds, that stamina is improving. But then we can work on things which will be more constructive instead of just giving sort of a band-aid. And I really like the quote, no one ever learned to walk by walking. It was by someone who was into Feldenkrais. And it's very much then about the component parts. So, for example, with walking, the babies need to learn the ability to lift their head, develop that strength, develop the spinal curves before they can walk. So if we look at the component parts to whatever we're doing, be it the handstand or be it other areas as well in our life, then it can be a lot more sort of grounding, embodying and fruitful than if we're just looking at like what looks like a final part. It's like being in a marriage and you can say, okay, we're in the marriage, that's it. Or you can go, okay, what is that we're doing in our marriage that feels great, that we should keep doing. So maybe we hang out like 5 nights a week and we make that concerted effort to do that. And then, or maybe we look at also what we'd like to do, what we're doing that we'd like to do more of. So maybe we decide, okay, we're going to hang out 6 nights a week. And then we can also look at what we're doing in the marriage, which maybe isn't so helpful. And then, I don't know what that can be, but we'll work it out. So we can talk about it and chat about it and then maybe change that aspect. And it's the same in anything. So it's the same in the handstands. It's the same in sort of identity. It's the same in relationships. So coming back to the beginning, which was a bit about social media, obviously you may not want people on your social media to go, oh, I really like what you're doing here, but this is really bad. Change this and then do more of this. But it is useful when people give feedback. So like they like to know more about what this one aspect or that. And then they could also private message you like if they think everything's bad. But so there's these kind of themes can work in sort of whatever areas we're working on. Okay, so this is something I wrote which is connected with this area. So if you go for a job interview and don't get the job, yes, in some ways that is not the job for you now, clearly because you don't have that job. Maybe it wouldn't be the emotional, the physical, or the breath fit. I remember the last job I had in a law firm, there was no windows that could open. So like they had like these fixed windows and just air conditioning and breathing. I found it really affected my breathing. Like I'm so used to having just open air that I really hated this air conditioning and not being able to open a window. I felt like in a prison. So yeah, even the breath fit can be an aspect to your work. And yes, maybe you don't have the experience though for the job. Maybe you have too much experience. Maybe if you apply for it next year, you will get that job. Or maybe you'll find another job that you prefer. Maybe you just create a job for yourself. Maybe you become self-employed and create your own thing. But let's not be egotistical. I'm not really into sort of the whole concept so much of like ego and stuff, but in this context, it sort of works. So let's not be egotistical and think that if there isn't a yes, they are missing out, the company or whatever you've applied for, and not vibing with you. And that sometimes you see this sort of in sort of yoga spirituality stuff that, they're not the they will miss out by not having you. And yes, okay, maybe sometimes there could be an aspect that someone will miss out or something will miss out if they're not in some aspect with you. But, the other flip side to that is if a biology GCSE student applies for a heart surgeon job, they're not going to get the job. And why? Because they're not qualified. So maybe in 10 years' time, they will have done medical training to make them a step closer to the job of a heart surgeon. But people under the guise of spirituality can sometimes lack intelligence in certain areas and suggest they're so amazing that a no is not their issue, but because the other of seeing their value. And now by intelligence, I don't mean like people can be intelligent in areas and not necessarily in other areas. And it's like anyone working with the body will know that. So you can have maybe at the beginning of your handstand journey, you don't have much intelligence in what your hands are doing. It doesn't mean like in another concept of intelligence, you're not an intelligent person. Maybe when you're in another context, but in the relationship with your hands in a handstand, maybe there isn't the intelligence there yet. And the same with surfing. Like if anyone, you start to feel more intelligence in your feet, like you feel more subtlety and more tuning into what they're doing. And then it's a having a growth mindset is the sense that we can all improve our intelligence in many areas. So it's not fixed. So it's not like someone doesn't have intelligence in a certain area, that's it. It can change, which is quite cool. Or we can get more stupid as well, which is like we could go the other way. So this applies to relationships as well. So sometimes no's, maybe it's just because it's not just about the other person missing out. Actually, maybe someone hasn't done the work to make a relationship work. Like I was talking about in a marriage, maybe you're not both making the effort to spend 5 nights a week together, and maybe that's sort of something which would help. Okay, so what if you don't get a job, maybe it's not right for you, or maybe not quite. Okay, fine. And it all comes back to similar things. So what is unhelpful in your life? What's a hindrance? So maybe what's unhelpful or a hindrance that you did in your job interview? Maybe you talked about that you really didn't want the job. Maybe that would be unhelpful long term for that job. But also, what did you do, even if you don't get a job or you don't end up in a certain relationship, what did you do that was good? So what would you like to create more of or preserve? And those are 3 aspects. And obviously those aspects can vary in different things. Which is why it's quite fun, just looking at these hodgepodge of areas today, that there's certain ways we can look at things, which, again, it comes back to universal in the way we can approach them. So we can approach that in any body work or movement, like what do we need to do more of that we're doing, which is working? What can we do less of? What's a hindrance? And, what do we want to preserve, keep the same? Like we don't want to do any more of it, otherwise we'll be sort of overworking certain areas of our body. And also in daily life, see what resonates, what doesn't. And what doesn't is, again, maybe a way in as well. Again, coming back to what do you want to do less of, or longer term or shorter term. And what about self-esteem based on other people is not going to work. So for example, if you applied for this job and your self-esteem takes a hit, maybe that's not stopped flashing. But also look at what you did right, so that's useful. And then if there's things that you did in the job interview that was with your values, so let's say you don't smoke, and then you applied for the job and they say, oh, do you smoke? And you could lie, because if everyone in the company smokes, maybe you wanted to fit in, but you said, no, I don't smoke. And then maybe they didn't give you the job, but you were with your values. So maybe that will give you more self-esteem, even though you didn't get that specific job. Things like that is sort of building self-esteem more than just like, oh, I'm amazing, I didn't get the job, but they miss out. But these kind of things. So again, it comes back to just being told you're great, amazing, which you see on social media, isn't necessarily the best way to get your self-esteem up. Obviously some photos will get more likes, more views, depending on different factors. I mean, some people can try and just like post pictures with less clothes on, and they can maybe get more likes. Maybe they don't. Maybe they get less likes. But there's different things. But that hopefully won't affect someone's self-esteem, because if it does, unless it's really part of your values, that maybe your value is to to be always clothed, and you do that, and then maybe, yes, your social media is connected with your values, helps you with your self-esteem. So it's, in social media, it's like, it's debatable how much of a real relationship it is. So involving mental, emotional, physical, and breath. Maybe you get a bit more of that with people you know on social media than people you don't know, because you only see certain facets. And there's an imagination with everyone, like you see someone, like you see me now, and there's a face, and you expect that I have a back to me as well. But you're sort of like, I have the back of my head. So there's an imagination sort of involved in every kind of relationship. But there's more of it involved with maybe things you don't know so much about. So when you see things, if you see something in front of you, you're expecting it to be 3D and it will have a back. It's not just a 2D hologram. Though that is a possibility as well. So we use our imagination the whole time, but it's also how, hopefully in useful contexts. What did I write? This may seem a bit random, but see if the emotions' reactions can make one better. Being able to feel that off-center is an ability to tune into awareness. So again, this resonates with things which feel good, or maybe you want to see less of, but it's you're tuning into yourself, which is a pretty cool thing to have. Okay, so so this is a lot about bias, this whole podcast. Positivity bias, negativity bias, just tuning in to what you want more of, what you want, what resonates, what you want to see less of, what is working for you at the moment that you want to expand, or what you want to keep pretty constant. On a whole positivity bias, I've got the 2 online workshops coming up, which is good things, so we can share them, we can celebrate them. So on the 24th of April at 9 a.m. UK time, you can join from anywhere in the world, is online handstand workshop. And yes, feel free to sign up. The link is in the bio, or you can pop me a message. And then there's a backbend, spinal mobility and breathing workshop on the 2nd of May, which is a Sunday. First one was a Saturday. It's the week after Saturday. The first one is the Saturday, second week is the Sunday at 9 a.m. UK. And again, you can sign up at Light Center UK, or send me a message if you need the exact link. Look forward to seeing you there. This is today's podcast. Great to see everyone tuning in. And yeah, interesting to share and chat in these kind of ways, and be more than sometimes just holograms. Till next time. How do I turn this off? I always have this issue. Aha.